Welcome back. Right-wing politicians in France, like Darmanin, have opposed the government's move to provide refuge to Afghan nationals. To discuss this topic about Afghan refugees in France, we have with us Yasser Louati. He's a French human rights and civil liberties advocate, community organizer, and a political analyst. Welcome, Yasser.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been, following the news, and we hear what is there Afghan refugees currently on the streets in Paris. Can you tell me how they have been treated?
Well, very badly, as at first they were always called and identified as unwelcome aliens into France. For many of them, it was an invasion of people, of undesirable people. And this discourse came not only from the far right, but also the mainstream conservative party. And to make things even worse, supposedly the French left bought into this narrative and beyond speaking of undesirable individuals, hunted these people, especially in the city of Paris. Paris is under the mayorship of Anne Hidalgo, a socialist mayor, and herself, has turned people's lives from the migrant communities impossible. For example, if you're an Afghan refugee or African refugee, she made it impossible for them to set up tents on the sidewalk when they apply for shelter. There is no room when they apply for paperwork. It takes between 2 and 3 years for their papers to be processed. And the socialist mayor of Paris went so far into criminalizing the Afghan refugees that she had brought in huge rocks to be put on the sidewalks in order to prevent Afghan refugees from being able to sleep on the sidewalk while, for example, waiting in front of the building of the France Terre d'Asile, which processes their refugee statuses. So here we have this, humongous hypocrisy in France towards Afghanistan. So France did not think twice before sending troops to bomb civilians over there, supposedly against, in the name of the war against terror, with the results that we all know in terms of civilian casualties and civil liberties. But when Emmanuel Macron spoke of Afghanistan, it didn't take him 2 minutes before speaking of an influx of, almost an invasion-like flow of Afghan refugees. He didn't speak of the human tragedy taking place over there, France's responsibility in destabilizing Afghanistan, and on top of it, the fact that for 3 years these people have not been treated very well. And just to finish, to give you a few figures, excuse me, just to give you a few figures, around 10,000 Afghan refugees have sought asylum, and barely 60% of them see their demands being processed. And among those, to make things even worse, they fall under the so-called Dublin Accords, which means they will have to apply in the country that has first registered them in Europe. So if they are in France, for example, and they were registered in Italy or in Greece, they will have to be sent back over there. So how is France truly taking this matter seriously? I really don't know. But honestly, this is also a moment of shame for this country.
What what has the reaction been to Macron's statement?
Many people in France were indeed shocked by his discourse that in the midst of a human tragedy unfolding before our eyes, that Emmanuel Macron would take the stage, excuse me, I will have to be blunt, as if his word matters on the international scene, but he took the stage to play into the far right rhetoric that we will have to fight against incoming refugees. So the reactions were split. Some people praised it, some said it wasn't enough, but also many people were shocked that Emmanuel Macron would be so heartless and have such short memory, i.e., that France bears a responsibility over what's going on today in Afghanistan.
And how has the Afghan woman being used in the rhetoric against Afghan men? and this hypocrisy that you're talking about?
Oh well, this is typical white saviorism that they were out there to save women from Afghanistan, but when Afghanis ask for asylum in France, they are unwelcome. So of course they use the same colonial rhetoric that we are going to defend Afghan women against Afghan men, but in the meantime, when these Afghan women seek asylum in France, they are unwelcome. The same thing, with Arab women and throughout the former colonies, African women as well, that it allows white men to feel empowered that they are in a God, given a mission to save non-white women, but in the end, nothing good comes out of it. They are just being used to legitimize Islamophobia on the one hand, and further put, white, supremacy as the norm, that these women need the assistance of white people. I would hope that France would support, for example, all the organizations that come to help Afghan refugees in the streets of Paris, instead of posing as the saviors of the Afghan people, at the same time not opening their doors when they seek asylum.
That was going to be my next question. How is the French Muslim community reacting to the new refugees that are coming in and the refugees that have been on the ground for 3 years? Could you share with us what here in the United States, many of the shops, the ethnic Muslim stores, have boxes out collecting donations outside mosques. What's the scene like in France?
Well, I will have on this one to be quite blunt again when it comes to Islamic organizations. Now, grassroots organizations have been indeed doing the best they could in order to provide shelter, to provide food, provide assistance, and sometimes even psychological support. But unfortunately, we do not see mosques opening their doors to Afghan refugees. Even any refugee coming to knock on their door, and it is not a coincidence that refugees would go and knock on the door of churches and not mosques, because mosques, unfortunately, do not welcome them. Mosque, managers and heads of mosques do not feel concerned by the topic. And unfortunately, we see, of course, all this rhetoric about so-called, the brotherhood of between Muslims, etc. But we see nothing of it. So the people who have power among Muslims are doing absolutely nothing. But the help is coming from everyday citizens who have a sense of responsibility in terms of having to not only assist refugees, but also to remember that they are, of course, in a much more comfortable situation than those people crossing half the world to seek asylum in a foreign country.
You're absolutely right about that. That the responsibility lies not just with the governments, but with the people as well. We are just living in the Western world. Our taxes were used to bomb and displace Afghans, and we do have a responsibility. What would you like to see more from the French Muslim community, as well as from the government, before we?
Well, from the government first, that they take their responsibilities, that instead of sending bombs abroad, they should be sending more economic help to help people avoid a situation where they were, pushed towards asylum and exile. All the people living in African nations and Asian nations do not do so because, they are happy to do it and because they are just looking for material wealth. They do it because they are either fleeing war, dictatorship, starvation, instability. And France has a huge responsibility in that, not only in Afghanistan, but also in throughout Africa. And France's responsibility keeps being pointed out by various NGOs, various investigations, various revelations. But at the same time, while France intervenes to destabilize these countries, it does nothing to welcome that misery it has created. So no, I do not blame a person who risks his or her life to cross the world and seek a better living for himself or herself or their children. As for communities in France, be it religious communities or non-religious communities, they have to understand that the comfort they live in is acquired on the back of the suffering of other people. And I'm going to again quote to you, for example, the former president of France, Jacques Chirac, a few years before passing away, he admitted in an interview that the money French people have in their pockets, a huge part of it comes from Africa. And today, if France can, pose as a wealthy nation and pretends to be a country where people have a decent living, people in France have to understand that this comes at a cost, and that cost is being, borne by people in the so-called third world. And now, right now, you mentioned, communities. Let's speak about the Muslim community. I do not like to, speak of the Muslim community. I don't think it exists as such. There are Muslim communities throughout France, and I think it is their responsibility to apply pressure on imams, on clerics, on public figures, on people, rectors of mosques, so they would welcome these refugees not only for shelter or food, but also to offer them opportunities to properly integrate. These people come oftentimes that don't speak the language, that don't know the culture, they have no one around. And if supposedly religious communities constantly lecture the rest of the world on hospitality towards the poor, and that the prophets before were poor people, and that they were helped by, and supported by others, the rich and the very few wealthy people who helped them, then do your job. And don't shut the mosque when a person comes knocking on the door just seeking help. And I recall in my neighborhood on the south side of Paris, many times you will see Iraqi refugees, Afghani refugees, Somalis, or for example, people from the Ivory Coast or other countries in sub-Saharan Africa would be literally unwelcome. So how shameful it is to use the name of a Muslim community when you have other Muslims coming from war-torn countries and then seek help and you deny them. And at the same time, you pause and say, oh, well, we care about Muslims abroad. First, care about your community, and that community also cares about these refugees. And again, I cannot highlight it enough. Imams have a huge responsibility. And I know as a human rights activist, it is not my position to call on clerics to intervene, but we need all the help we can get. And mosques and imams are not, a foreign entity or living in a bubble. They are part of this society, and if this society requires us to show solidarity towards the poor and the people fleeing wars abroad, then so do mosques, synagogues, churches, imams, rabbis, and priests. And again, I repeat, open your doors. One day or another, you might face the same hardship, and you would be happy someone is out there to give you a helping hand.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your words. This is a message to those in our audience watching. Open your doors. Even here, there is an influx of unaccompanied children who have come into the United States and need foster homes. They need parenting. They need people who can take them into their homes so they don't get lost in this secular world. So as anchors at a Muslim Network TV, we urge the community here and in Canada to take in and be responsible for these refugees who are coming in. Thank you so much, Brother Yasser, for your time. And
Thank you.
as we move on to our next segment, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back after.